Good morning and welcome to Breaking Politics on a day where the big news in politics, as it is in business and elsewhere in the country, is Qantas. CEO Alan Joyce has announced that the airline delivered a $252 million loss in the first half of the financial year. And more importantly, as far as the wider community and certainly politics here in Parliament House are concerned, is the announcement that there'll be 5,000 jobs cut. To discuss this and other issues of the day, to bring us up to date, we're joined by Michael Packey, the Bureau Chief at Fairfax Radio here in Parliament House. Michael, good morning.
G'day, Chris. How are you?
This announcement from Qantas, a bad result, was expected. What have politicians been saying about it?
Well, at this point in time, we're still waiting for some of the politicians to actually respond to these results. We know that within the next 40 minutes or so, the independent senator, Nick Xenophon, will be holding a news conference, and he has been a staunch critic of Qantas, and he's been asking for the CEO, Alan Joyce, and some board members to be let go, and the company so the company can get itself back on track. But before the profits were released, we did hear from the Federal Transport Minister Warren Truss and also the Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen. Now, Warren Truss was asked about what will the government do to help Qantas out through this period. Will it offer this debt guarantee that we've been hearing about over the last few weeks? Will it consider changes to the Qantas Sale Act? He really wouldn't be drawn on either of those issues this morning on radio when he did his interview, but he did say what he wants to do is wait to see how the market responds to these Qantas results, and then the government and cabinet will consider what sort of measures that they could implement to assist Qantas. There is some speculation that the government won't push ahead with the debt guarantee. That is a guarantee that it guarantees basically Qantas's debts, and it seems as though the government won't be pushing ahead with that. What the government does want to do is make changes to the Qantas Sale Act, especially lifting the 49% foreign ownership restriction. As we know, Labor is not too keen on that. They want Qantas to remain in Australian hands, but it's understood that Labor may be considering other changes to the Qantas Sale Act, which may be more palatable to them, to the Labor Party, and potentially also to the government.
Okay, Michael, I'm going to interrupt you there because we're going to cross live now to Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas, who's addressing the media.
Okay.
On our domestic airlines cannot be ignored. The domestic profit pool was over $700 million in 2012. In the first half of this year, we know it was less than $100 million. Tomorrow, when Virgin reports, we'll know by exactly how much it has declined, probably a lot less. Now, Qantas has been raising these matters with the Australian government of the day for more than 2 years, especially since the fundamental shift brought about by the Virgin capital raising last year. Senior politicians on both sides have recognised the distortion of the fair competition in the Australian aviation market, and talks with government continue. But we must act now. Last December, I announced that we would achieve $2 billion in cost reductions by the end of financial year 2017. Today, I announce details of that commitment. But first, let me stress that our guiding principles will not change. Safety is always our #1 priority, along with being the first choice for customers in every market that we serve, maintaining our dual brand strength in the domestic market, continuing to transform Qantas International, maintaining the Jetstar opportunity in Asia, and broadening Qantas loyalty for strong, diversified earnings. While the guiding principles won't change, however, the way we implement them will. We have to make the tough decisions and hard choices. We will be deferring growth and working our existing assets harder, deferring or selling more than 50 aircraft, accelerating the modernisation of work practices, adopting efficient new technologies across our business, and disciplining our capital outlays in line with our financial circumstances. We will cut where we can in order to invest where we must. We'll be a far leaner Qantas group. And it should be clearly understood that we are taking these actions, we must take these actions, irrespective of any decision which the government may or may not take in relation to levelling the playing field. Our priorities are to strengthen our core business and protect the sources of our long-term competitive advantage. They are the customer experience, whether it's on the ground, in the air, it is our frequent flyer programme, and it is our domestic two-brand strength. That is how we'll preserve as many jobs as possible and ensure the return of the group to profitability. Let me outline some key elements of our response. Having undertaken a detailed review of our networks and schedules, we will exit underperforming routes. We'll reassign aircraft to better match current demand, sell aircraft and defer deliveries, and increase utilisation through improved turnaround times. As a result, we'll see a major change in our fleet profile. Our remaining domestic 737-400s are being retired this month. The retirement of the remaining 15 767s in the fleet will be brought forward to early 2015. The retirement of 6 older 747s will be brought forward to early 2016. 3 of the remaining 11 787s aircraft on order will be deferred, and 8 A380s on order will be deferred, and they will be subject to ongoing reviews of future requirements. And the A320 order book will be substantially restructured. These measures will dramatically streamline and simplify our fleet. More than 50 aircraft will be deferred or sold. From 11 aircraft types, the fleet will go down to just 7 by the end of June 2016. There will be more efficiency, they will be a more efficient fleet and more cost-effective fleet while offering a consistently high customer experience. Taking the $2 billion in costs by the end of financial year 2017 requires difficult decisions across all aspects of our business. Today, I regret to announce that we will be reducing our employee numbers by the equivalent of 5,000 full-time staff over the next 3 years. This number includes the 1,000 we announced last December. This will be managed through reductions right across the group, including a reduction of management and non-operational roles by 1,500, operational positions that were affected by the fleet and network changes, a restructuring of line maintenance operations, a restructuring of catering facilities, including the closure of the Adelaide catering facility as we have previously announced. The closure of Avalon heavy maintenance space, as previously announced, is also included in the numbers. We will continue the current wage and bonus freeze for all group executives, and will be implementing a wage freeze right across the entire Qantas group. I will be meeting the unions tomorrow to go through those details. We will not be complementing pay increases or bonuses until Qantas is profitable again. I want to say how much I regret the need for these wide-ranging job losses. This is not a reflection on the hard work and commitment of our employees, but as a result of the stark realities that we face. We'll be working with our employees to manage this process in a compassionate way. This is an unavoidable decision if we are to safeguard the core of Qantas Group and preserve the long-term future of the business. In terms of capital expenditure, we will be matching our capital outlays to our financial circumstances. With the changes to our fleet, we expect to see our net capital investment reduced to an average of $800 million per annum over the next 2 financial years, a total reduction of $1 billion over that 2-year period. Turning to Jetstar in Asia. Over recent years, Jetstar has been a pioneering Australian brand in Asia. It has achieved unprecedented acceptance in the Asian marketplace, which is the fastest growing aviation market in the world, and a huge growing middle class that loves to travel. The prospects for Jetstar in Asia are a major opportunity that we continue to believe in. But we need to make the right decisions in accord with current market circumstances and our balance sheet. In Singapore, growth has been suspended by the Jetstar Asia Board until such time as conditions improve. The overarching focus in Asia continues to be profitable bedding down the existing businesses and partnerships. Today our focus is on transforming our cost base for earnings recovery. We have been working through a structural review of the Qantas Group to unlock value. Qantas has valuable and desirable assets across our diversified portfolio, and we're working through the options to make the right strategic decisions for the future. Today we announced that Qantas has reached agreement on the disposal of its Brisbane terminal lease to Brisbane Airport Corporation with a cash value of $112 million to be recognised in the second half of the financial year. No final decision has been made on the other assets within the group's portfolio. We will update the market as and when there are further announcements to be made. I said that our priorities are to strengthen the core of our business and to protect the sources of our long-term competitive advantage. Our customers are at the heart of what we do. I know how satisfied our customers are with their service and product. Our research tells us that, our customers tell us that, and we've reached record levels of advocacy. That won't change. Indeed, we're going to continue to invest to improve that. We'll continue our A330 reconfiguration project to deliver the best-in-class experience on our domestic and international products. Wonderful new lounges will open up over the next few months in Hong Kong and Los Angeles to complement the success of our Singapore lounge. We'll maintain our customer service training and business-wide commitment to excellence in both Qantas and in Jetstar. And we'll continue to strengthen Qantas loyalty for our customers. Quite simply, Qantas will remain the best premium domestic carrier in the world and a top-tier international carrier. Jetstar will remain the leading low-fares airline in Australia in all the markets that it services. And our domestic strategy has not changed. We'll remain absolutely committed to maintaining that strength of our two-brand position in the domestic market, and we'll be maintaining our network, product, our frequency share advantage in the premium market, and our scale advantage in the leisure market. We do not step back from our commitment to keep Qantas and Jetstar the most profitable and successful domestic carriers. Finally, let me say this. There are many examples of Australian companies that have failed because they have not been prepared to make the hard decisions. Qantas is not one of them. Over a 93-year history, Qantas has a reputation of resilience and adaptation. We have survived through wars, we've survived through crisis, we've survived through boom, we've survived through bust. And over the past 5 years, we've shown yet again that we can take the tough decisions to adapt to a changing world. We are now enduring some of the toughest decisions and some of the toughest conditions that we've ever had to face. We are doing what is right and what is necessary. We'll draw upon the deep resources that this company has. We have a young fleet, a state-of-the-art product, technology and service. We have a superior on-time performance and customer satisfaction ratings. We have two outstanding brands in Qantas and Jetstar, plus a frequent flyer program which is going from strength to strength. And most of all, our people who are skilled, committed and passionate about Qantas. At the end of this transformation, the Qantas Group will be still an employer of more than 27,000 Australians. The vast majority of people and jobs in this group we're aiming to protect. Qantas will still be one of the world's great airlines, recognising and rewarding its loyal customers, and Qantas will still be a strategic asset to Australia. We'll be representing the best of Australia at home in the world, caring for Australians in time of natural disaster and crisis, and sharing the spirit of Australia from rural and regional Australia to our cities around the world. We must, and we are, making the hard but necessary decisions that will protect this great company and ensure its return to profitable and sustainable future. Thank you. We may open it to questions now. First question was?
Alan, just can you tell us, is there any discussion with the board about your own position as Chief Executive of Qantas, and also in regards to the loss that the shareholders are clearly going to have to bear in some way, shape or form? Does that have any impact on your ongoing commitment and your contract with Qantas?
I'm absolutely committed to Qantas. Going forward, we believe that obviously the circumstances that Qantas faces today are very difficult. We have the capacity situation internationally and domestically that's adding to significant losses to our international business in particular. But we have a plan to fix that problem, a plan that covers every aspect of the changes that we need to make in the business to get it back to profitability. And we have the courage and commitment as a management team to make that happen. And we have the board, the management, fully behind the plan going forward and fully committed to turning this business around. Yes, next question. Sorry, I've got a few lights in my, maybe that gentleman there in the corner.
Hi there, Alan. I think we were hoping that the international result would be one of the better results after what you did with Emirates last year, but it's a pretty heavy loss. So I was wondering if you could help explain a little bit more about why that's not meeting some of what people expected from that.
Yeah, I'll start with it. I might ask Gareth to contribute to this. There's a couple of factors that are there. There's been a 9% growth in capacity coming in and out of Australia, particularly capacity added to Southeast Asia and to the European markets, which have resulted in a significant yield increase of over 4% on our international business. We've also, because of record high fuel prices, the longer the sectors, which is the case in international, the bigger the impact that we've had from fuel. We've had a significant rise in costs on the fuel side. I have to say though, as I mentioned in the speech, the Emirates Alliance is getting a great reaction. It's made a big difference to our European operations, but the overwhelming capacity growth and the impact of fuel has meant that that business performance has gone slightly south. Has gone south. Gareth, you want to?
Yeah, I think we've covered most of it there. I think the other point we'd make is that the unit cost performance in international was down by 4%, so we continue to take the cost down, but not at a rate fast enough to offset the yield decline, which is being exacerbated or driven by the significant levels of capacity growth that have been poured into Australia by overseas carriers.
Yeah, over here.
Hi, Alan. I just have two questions. The first is just on the international business. Do you still have a target of returning it to profitability by the end of the 2015 financial year? And just secondly, why would you want to raise domestic capacity by 3 to 4% in the second half, given that there's already an oversupply of capacity in the domestic market?
I'll go for the first one. We've always said in relation to the international business that could be subject to tailwinds or headwinds that could impact on our ability to deliver that profitability target. And unfortunately, the exchange rate, the high fuel price, the changes in capacity that's been added by our competitors have, as I said, impacted our business quite significantly, and the business will not be producing the profit that as we had originally planned. We are, though, when we look at the changes that we have in our plan, taking significant costs out of all of our business, but particularly international, and the changes that we announced here today of the retirement of the older 747s and the use of the A330s on those international Asian markets, the increase in utilisation that we'll get out of the A380 fleet will all help improve the international business performance going forward. And we're confident that we'll see with this plan a significant improvement in its performance. In terms of the domestic market, we are very clearly protecting our position in the domestic market. We, as I mentioned in the speech, have the only profitable carriers operating in the domestic operation today. We haven't added as much capacity as our competitors have over the last few years. They're absolutely implying the position of adding capacity, even though they are losing a significant amount of money and their strategy is loss-making. But the reason why Qantas is successful domestically is that it has a frequency and network advantage, it has a product advantage, it has a service advantage. It is a carrier that has typically outperformed the competition now for over a decade because it's maintained those advantages. It would be amiss of us to weaken that product in any way, and we are committed to making sure that it has the best product for the business market. Similarly, on the leisure end of the market, the reason why Jetstar is outperforming its competitors is because it's got the scale advantage, it's got the recognition advantage, and as a consequence it has a cost-based advantage and a revenue premium over its competitions. Again, we would be amiss if we didn't manage and keep those advantages going forward. So our domestic strategy has always been very clear. Sometimes people simplify it. It is more complicated than some of the simple commentary that's been out there. And it's because of that strategy that we still maintain profitability domestically and significantly outperform our competitors. Yes? Oh, we got one here.
Mr. Joyce, two questions. First of all, do you think today's announcements and cuts and changes to strategy is going to be enough to get the government to give you assistance in either the form of changing the Sales Act or a debt guarantee? And secondly, could you explain to the 5,000 workers or more who are about to lose their jobs why you've chosen Sydney's most expensive hotel, the Westin, in which to hold this event and not at your brand new Mascot campus, which would accommodate this?
So let me cover the first part. We're continuing in dialogue with the government. We said, and again I said in the speech here to be absolutely clear, that the plan we have is the plan that's needed in order to turn around the business, irrespective of the government involvement or what the government decides to do. This plan is needed in order to address the unacceptable performance of our airline businesses. This plan is needed in order to make sure that we have a capital requirement going forward that doesn't exceed the operating cash flows of the business. So this plan is needed irrespective of what happens with government. The dialogue with government has been well communicated, has been well broadcast. That will continue, and we continue with them today. In terms of where we do these press conferences, we've typically done these press conferences here in the city. It is easier for, you see the amount of interest that we have here, and accommodating this level of press, this level of interest, and accommodating the analysts and the shareholders that want to speak to us and the level of interest we have. This is the best facility to do that. Next question. Steve?
Oh, hi. You talked in your speech about modernising work practices. What are you looking at in that extent, and what sort of reception do you expect from the unions to that and to the job losses? And also, in terms of the domestic capacity, have you got any projections for when you see this domestic capacity sort of demand sort of equaling out?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing, there are changes. We have been over the last 4 or 5 years, for a long time, Steve, as you know, changing the way we do a lot of things in the business. As you can see from this announcements today, we are renewing the fleet at a rapid rate. The fleet age is the youngest it's been since privatisation, under 8 years of age. That significant change in technology means that work practices have to change. The way we've been doing maintenance, the way we've been doing a lot of activity around the aircraft is changing. We previously announced the closure of our heavy maintenance facilities in Tullamarine, which closed last year, and Avalon that will close at the end of this month because of those changes. Aircraft need less maintenance. When you need less maintenance, you need less people to do that maintenance. You do the maintenance in very different ways. They're the changes to work practices that we're implementing. We've also been using new technology in check-in, new technology in the way we do head office and background support for our people, and they mean changes in jobs, changes in support, changes in how we manage the business. So it is very much across the board. I think, certainly with our employees. There is recognition out there that the company has significant issues, that the company is underperforming, and that their changes are needed, and that we do need to adapt to the current environment, which is a challenge for us as a business. And I've no doubt that that message is getting through. And we are meeting the unions tomorrow, as I mentioned, to talk through the details of what this plan is, to talk through what we're trying to achieve, and to get the union reaction to where we stand. Yeah. Mark?
Mr. Joyce, $2 billion in savings, 5,000 jobs to go, 50 planes retired. How will customers, do you think, notice the differences with this new leaner Qantas?
What we are still doing here, Mark, is investing in the customer. As I mentioned, the investment in new aircraft still continues. We are going to be retiring the older aircraft in the fleet, the old 747s, the 767s, the 734s. So customers will see newer aircraft operating across the Qantas domestic and international network. We're investing in product, the lie-flat beds on the A330s, which is a product enhancement for the East-West operations and the Asian operations. That continues, and that investment continues. We're opening new lounges in LA and in Hong Kong. Now, the reason why we're doing that is the customer is extremely important to us. We have a cost problem that we have to address, but we can't have a revenue problem. We need to continue to invest in getting customer satisfaction improving, making sure that customers stay with Qantas and attracting customers back. And what we do on product, what we do on network, what we do with our partners is all key to that, and it's also part of this plan going forward. Yes? Over here.
Hi, Alan. You talked about the international aspect and the problems being partly due to the increase in capacity. But that's not going to change. So therefore, even if you continue to reduce costs, aren't you going to continue to face the same problem? You also talked about the fact that the Emirates deal had a very good impact on your European business. Can you talk about what it's meant to your Asian business and the loss of passenger numbers there, particularly flying to places like Singapore?
Look, I think we absolutely recognise the reality of competition in this industry, and so we recognise that is something that's not going to abate. We have to be able to control what we can control as an organisation. One thing we clearly can control is our fleet and our cost base and our partnerships, and the strategy for international is all about those three. So we have to get our costs down to become more competitive, and we've got a wide-ranging cost program. The $2 billion covers the whole organisation, and a significant proportion of that will manifest itself in the international business. We've also been on a journey simplifying our fleet, reducing the fleet age, and fleet simplification. A smaller number of aircraft types in a smaller number of configurations drives a significant amount of simplification and cost reduction into the business, and it's taken a long time for us to get there because of aircraft delays along the way, and we're getting there. We're almost there. The refleeting of the business is nearly complete, and that will help drive efficiencies and reduce costs. And then we have to make sure we have the right partners in the right markets. Emirates is clearly the right partner for us to Europe. The customers are telling us that, and the economics is telling us that, and it has enabled us to restructure our Asian network to focus more on point-to-point and focus on retiming those flights to when customers want to fly to Asia. Now, we always said at the time we did that was going to take some time to grow into, and that is happening. It is taking some time to grow into. We always expected that, but we are very, very confident that as we move forward, we're going to see that new reshaped Asian network drive benefits for us, and along with the cost reductions that we're focused on.
Next question.
Mr. Joyce, on the wage freeze, what proportion of your workforce could you immediately move on to the wage freeze, and what proportion are on current enterprise agreements? And secondly, with that second lot, how are you going to avoid the problem that Toyota had, where they went to their workforce, wanted to change their enterprise agreement, and were rebuffed?
So we're going to be working through, which you're absolutely right. There's different complexities in EBAs that are open and EBAs that are currently closed. Qantas has, I think, 54 different EBAs across 14 different union groups, some of which are open today, which our pay policy going forward will be no pay increases until the company makes money. And then the EBAs that are closed, we'll be talking to those unions directly, and in some cases waiting until the EBA opens up and then applying it. We'll make sure that at the end of the process that we've addressed in all of the areas and have quality across all parts of the group, and this applies to all parts of the group. Yes, over here.
Hey, just a couple of things. Both John Borghetti and John Sharp from RAGS have made the argument that if there is any sort of debt guarantee, it should apply to the whole industry. Do you agree with that, and if not, why not? And just one other thing, around Jetstar Asia, the freeze there, I mean, your competitors are expanding quite rapidly in the Southeast Asian low-cost carrier market. Is this a recognition that it's too tough in that market now?
Well, I think both sides, firstly, your first question first, I think both sides of politics recognise that there is an unlevel playing field. They recognise that the Qantas Sale Act shackles Qantas, and that doesn't apply to any other players in the industry. I think the Treasurer actually had 4 different principles that apply to governments getting involved with businesses and industries. He said, first of all, is there an act or piece of legislation that uniquely applies to the company and acts as a ball and chain, I think some of the references were, and clearly with Qantas that's the case. He said, secondly, is a company competing against SOEs, state-owned enterprises, that are distorting the market, and again, clearly with Qantas that's the case. Our international competition and now our major domestic competition is supported by SOEs. Thirdly, is there a national interest? Qantas is the national carrier, has a huge national footprint, has a huge national interest, strategic for this country. So clearly Qantas ticks that box. And then the fourth one is clearly the company doing what it can to make sure that it manages its own affairs. We are clearly, over the last 5 years, making big inroads into our cost base. We have to do more, and today's plan clearly indicates that we are doing more. So on your second part of your question? Jetstar in Asia. Jetstar in Asia for us, we have to, as we said, make tough decisions across the individual group and make sure we prioritise the core of our operation. Jetstar in Asia has still to bed down its growth in Japan and its other activities in Vietnam and Hong Kong. And in Southeast Asia and Singapore in particular, we've seen huge growth in capacity by the competition that has strained the profitability of that business. We believe with all of the priorities around the group, the appropriate thing is to stop the growth in that business, and the board of Jetstar Asia have agreed to stop the growth in that business and consolidate all resources and activity on the other areas in the group that have a priority.
Alan, you're retiring a bunch of 747s early, and you're deferring 8 new A380s. Is that going to mean that you're going to have to? Where are those 747s flying at the moment? And does that mean you're going to contract your international network?
I think, as I said to an earlier question, this is a lot of this is facilitated by fleet simplification and the coming together of the fleet plan that's been planned over a long period of time. Those 747s, the oldest, 6 of them, we've accelerated the retirement, and we're going to be making some changes to the international network that free up some A380 aircraft. But also, as the 787s come into Jetstar, they're freeing up A330s, and those A330s will fly both domestically and internationally. So we will end up with a fleet for Qantas, 737s and A330 flying domestically, and A380s, young 747, A330-300s flying internationally. So we will have a much simpler fleet, a much more efficient fleet, a young fleet with great product on it, and that will help drive efficiencies and the right network for that part of the business.
Other questions?
Alan, could we go back and have a quick look at the job losses? We talked about management, non-operational roles, maintenance and catering. What other skills are you targeting to lose, and will it include pilots and flight attendants?
Well, of course, what we're saying is every aspect of the company gets impacted by this, because there is less flying, we're changing the network, we're changing the size of aircraft operating on certain routes. That means less operating crew, pilots and cabin crew needed across those changes in that part of the operation. So every part of the business gets impacted by this. What we are doing, and the principles that we are applying on this, is that obviously safety is going to be our number one priority in everything that we do. Secondly, we have a focus on making sure that the customer and the customer needs are satisfied all the way through this. And thirdly, we are protecting as many jobs as we possibly can with the changes that we're making. We do believe that there are parts of the business, like as we mentioned, Perth, Singapore, that are losing significant amounts of money that we have to withdraw from, and changes that we have to make in aircraft like the 747s, which are older aircraft, consuming a lot more fuel, and we've brought forward the retirement of them. Unfortunately, they do have an impact on employees in all parts of the company when those changes are made.
Alan, the government said it's legislating that change to the Qantas Sale Act. How optimistic are you that that will get through, and what impact will that have on Qantas?
Well, to be very clear, I mean, the Qantas Sale Act, I think even the Deputy Prime Minister made a comment in early January when he was acting Prime Minister and said it was going to be difficult to see that getting through the Parliament. It needs to get through, changes to that need to get through the lower house and the upper house. Certainly the Labour Party and the Greens are not in support of it, so it needs a change in the Senate to even have a chance. And then I think Mr Palmer's party have also said they're not in support of it. So in the short term, we don't see any changes that are likely to occur on that. The issue for us, therefore, is how does the government level the playing field in the short term? The action is needed in the short term, and they need to take the appropriate action to make sure that the distortion that everybody clearly recognises doesn't continue. And the issue with the Qantas Sale Act is going to be the length of time. It could be months, it could be years before that act changes. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, and that was Qantas CEO Alan Joyce and the Chief Financial Officer Gareth Evans talking to the media live following the announcement that the airline has lost a massive $252 million in the first half of the financial year. Now, Alan Joyce is setting out an ambitious program to cut $2 billion worth of costs from the airline over the next 3 years, and that includes the loss of some 5,000 jobs. Now, part of the plan will be cutting back on unprofitable routes. They'll be retiring older aircraft, particularly 747s. They'll be deferring buying new planes, particularly A380s, the massive super jumbos. Alan Joyce indicated that a previous goal of returning the international routes to profitability by 2015, he's backing away from that now. He says the international routes are suffering very much from the exchange rate, from high fuel costs, and also increased capacity put on by competitors. Now that's the situation with Qantas, and now attention will return very much here to Canberra and what the government will do to help Qantas. And there's a couple of options on the board that are being talked around. As we know, this bad result for Qantas has been foreshadowed, and there has been talk around Parliament about what the government may do. One step would be for the government to go guarantor on Qantas's debt. Last year, the credit rating for Qantas was reduced to so-called junk status. And what that means is when it issues corporate bonds or it borrows money from banks, it must pay a much higher interest rate. If the government were to go guarantor, then it would pay a much lower interest rate. Another change that we may see that has been floated is that the government may try and repeal or amend the Qantas Sale Act. This was the act passed by Parliament when Qantas was privatised some years ago, and it limits foreign ownership to 49% of the airline. And the Qantas management argues this puts a hamper on getting investment into the airline. But this is a proposal that so far has been opposed by Labor and the Greens. Throw into the mix the position of Independent Senator Nick Xenophon that says that any government help should be dependent on changes in the Qantas board and management. Now, it was interesting to hear Alan Joyce in that press conference say he was absolutely committed to staying on as CEO, and that the same went for the board and the management. Now, to discuss what the government may or may not do to help Qantas in this situation, I spoke earlier, before the announcement of the results was released, before that live press conference, obviously, I spoke to Green Senator Larissa Waters from Queensland and the National Party MP Andrew Broad, who's the member for Mallee in Victoria. Well, to discuss Qantas and other issues of the day, we're joined by Green Senator Larissa Waters from Queensland and National Party MP Andrew Broad from the Mallee in Victoria. Larissa Waters, to you first. What assistance, if any, should the government give to Qantas, and what assistance should be ruled out?
Well, first and foremost, the Greens really feel for people who will have their jobs slashed by Alan Joyce, and this is very troubling. The huge numbers of job losses from today's announcement are real people that are now on the scrap heap. I think it's really dangerous if Tony Abbott now says, with those workers slashed, well, now we'll support you. The concern is that actually the government should be providing assistance to Qantas to retain jobs, not providing it as some reward after they've sacked workers. So I think they've got it a bit topsy-turvy. The Greens are happy to consider support for Qantas, but only if it comes with the guarantee that those local workers will be protected.
And does the government need to extract a price from Qantas? In other words, changes at the top of the airline?
Well, there's obviously a lot of strong views about whether Alan Joyce has done a good job or not. I think sacking workers and presiding over a loss is certainly not a good track record. But the key thing is the government should not be rewarding companies for sacking workers. They should be providing support to keep workers.
Andrew Broad, what help should the government extend to Qantas? On what things would you rule out?
Well, look, I think the first thing to understand is the airline industry is tough. And we've actually created an environment in Australia where doing business is getting increasingly more expensive. Qantas is paying $100 million in carbon tax, which is 1,000 jobs, the equivalent of funding 1,000 jobs. Our wages are dear, and they've got to compete with other parts of the world that have got very cheap wages and have got a very competitive airline industry. Finding the balance between where a government should step in, and I don't think a government should step in and take over management, because I think that's fraught with danger, and ensuring that we can try and keep Australian jobs is the challenge. But at the end of the day, if an airline isn't making money, that does come back on, unfortunately, the people that work very hard within that airline. And we have to ensure that we can create the economic framework for business to function, or we'll see more businesses like Qantas going the direction that they may be going. Okay, the two options that appear to be on the table is one that the government goes guarantor to the company's debt, and the second is to repeal or amend the Qantas Sales Act, which would then allow, amongst other things, greater foreign ownership. Are either of those palatable, or are they a good idea? What are your thoughts? Look, the Sale Act's an interesting one because it probably isn't restricting Qantas as a business now very much. There's still a potential for another 10% of foreign ownership to come into Qantas without repealing the Sale Act. But my understanding is that Virgin and Rex believe that it's not any inhibitor on them if we do repeal the Sale Act. So that's a decision for the Cabinet. In regards to going a guarantor, I'll be interested in the announcement. I mean, I would love to see a strong Australian airline, but an airline has to be profitable, and it is in a very tough trading environment. It's got lots of regulated and costs on it that we need to remove, And I really think the role of government is to create the framework for business to function, not to spend a lot of time trying to pick winners.
Okay, Larissa Water, would the Greens be comfortable with lifting the foreign ownership restrictions?
No, look, we don't support flogging off Qantas because you'll see even more jobs offshored, and we need a national carrier. My concern with some of the remarks that Andrew has just made is that this is a backdoor attack on workers' conditions. We know that the Abbott government wants to reinvigorate work choices, albeit under any other name, and I fear that this is a backdoor attack on those working conditions. And if we see those foreign ownership restrictions eased even further, then there'll be even less limitation on simply being able to offshore jobs.
But if the airline isn't profitable, how can you guarantee Australian jobs?
Well, look, you know, obviously it's a tricky situation, but I think the government should not be encouraging and rewarding offshoring of jobs and reducing working conditions.
Okay, Andrew Broad, Labor has raised the spectre that if foreign ownership restrictions were lifted, Qantas's assets are worth much more than its share market value, and that leaves open the possibility that someone would buy the airline and then split it up and sell the individual businesses. As a regional member, are you concerned that changes to Qantas could affect your constituents' air routes going to regional Australia?
Well, I think the thing that needs to be understood is that Qantas International is struggling. You know, the domestic airline is quite profitable, and I suppose, you know, if not Qantas, then there's still a cash flow positive business in transporting people across regional Australia. So that's something I think, you know, needs to be stated first. So the thing might shift. You know, I mean, we've got Rex and Virgin flying into the inland airport in my electorate, and they're providing very good service. And, you know, it's one thing for Australians to put their hand in their heart and say, we want Australian, you know, airline, or we want Australian food. They don't buy it. So they've got to actually make sure that their patriotism turns out to where they spend their dollars, and otherwise it's all analytical. And, you know, Larissa's right, jobs do go offshore if the airline falls over. And the best thing you can provide a person is a profitable business so that.
Okay, we'll break into that interview because the Leader of the Opposition, Bill Shorten, and Shadow Transport Minister Anthony Albanese are doing a live press conference here in Parliament House.
Synonymous with calling Australia home than Qantas Airways. This is the worst day for aviation people since the collapse of Ansett. That the Abbott government has done nothing to try and fight for Australian jobs at Qantas, like they failed to do anything for Australian jobs in other closures announced, is truly alarming. It's unforgivable not to fight for the jobs of Australian workers, Qantas workers in this case. Since Qantas announced its downgrade on December the 6th, the Abbott government has been sending up a furious series of thought bubbles with no visible outcomes. So now Qantas today has had to make these very tough decisions, yet the Abbott government has known there's been a challenge for Qantas since December the 6th, and they've done nothing. I might now ask my colleague, our shadow spokesperson for aviation, transport and infrastructure and tourism, to talk further about today's announcement. Anthony.
Thank you, Bill. Today's announcement is indeed devastating for those 5,000 workers and their families. Particularly today, also devastation will be felt by many of those families in my electorate of Grayndler, where many workers in the sector are based. Standard & Poor's announced the downgrade of Qantas on December 6. Since then, what we have seen in the press day after day is speculation about government action. Speculation that has led to further speculation and further speculation upon that. What we haven't seen is government action. What that has done is fed the insecurity that those workers at Qantas and most significantly as well, isn't just the direct employees, but the flow-on effect because of the importance of the aviation and tourism sector. The failure of the government to act up to this point, whilst at the same time they've been prepared to give hints, to indicate support, to say the government would be heading in a particular direction, is, in my view, irresponsible and characteristic of a government that had a plan to get into government but not a plan to actually govern.
Mr Short, Nick Xenophon just said that the first of the 5,000 jobs that should go is Alan Joyce's. Should it?
Well, first of all, we've got 5,000 people whose jobs are being announced. Today is a day for the Abbott government to show some leadership. Everyone has known that Qantas is confronting tough issues since last December, early last December, 3 months ago. Where is the Abbott government's plan for Qantas jobs? They've been sending out more messages and more signs. They've been sending out smoke signals. They've been flying kites. Now is the time, and indeed 3 months ago was the time, for the Abbott government to say what's their plan for a national aviation carrier. Is their only plan for the future of Australian aviation to sell it offshore? So I understand Nick Xenophon's frustration with management. I would say to Senator Xenophon that you can have your arguments with the management, but there's an issue here for the Abbott government. They control aviation policy. They've been sending all sorts of messages that if Qantas makes what the Abbott government call hard decisions, then they would come in behind them. And they've been saying this pretty clearly. They're considering a debt guarantee. Is it the case now that Qantas has made these very hard decisions? Will the Abbott government now back up what they've been hinting and promising the market, consumers, the aviation public, or will they just play political games and focus solely on the Sale Act? I hope not.
The government to run the airline?
No, but what I recognise is that 8 of the top... Let's look at the world in which Qantas competes. 8 of the top 10 airlines in the world are owned by governments. So when the Abbott government says that the Qantas has got to make hard decisions, I can't think of anything much harder than 5,000 people losing their job. When they say that Qantas has got to get its house in order, what will the Abbott government do now? Will they keep playing with the red herring, which is really a proposition which says that either you have majority Australian ownership or you have a foreign government buy our airline? The issues here are that the Abbott government has teased Qantas and the public by saying we will look at a debt guarantee. It's now time for them to make sure that we still have an Australian icon, an Australian brand.
Albanese, can I ask for you to enunciate why you think Australia needs a national airline? And secondly, given that there is talk about this debt guarantee, why should taxpayers offer, in effect, that debt guarantee when Qantas is doing unsustainable things like trying to keep 65% of the domestic market?
A couple of things. Firstly, in terms of international aviation, the way that it is organised is through air services agreements between nation states. So in order to fly into and out of Australia, you need an agreement between government to government. Those agreements are based upon Australian carriers being majority Australian owned. That's defined very clearly in the Air Navigation Act. It's also very clear in the agreements that have been signed by Australia with other governments. That's why Virgin has split its company so that the international arm is still majority Australian owned, but the domestic arms are where you've had the foreign capital injection. That injection, they can't because of the Qantas Sale Act. That injection of capital that occurred in November was from 3 government-backed airlines: Singapore, Etihad in the UAE, and Air New Zealand, that of course returned with government injection a few years ago. The fact is that there is a reason why nation-states have airlines, whether they be big countries or small countries like Royal Brunei Airlines. That's because it is an important part of the national interest. It plays a role in national security. It plays a role also every time that the flying kangaroo is seen anywhere in the world. That is an ad for Australian tourism, not just an ad for Qantas, that's an ad that says come to Australia. So it's important in terms of those issues. It's important also, can I say, as Transport Minister, when we needed to help assist Australians in trouble in Cairo, in Beirut and in Bangkok, Qantas was there a phone call away. And that is why, in terms of a whole range of reasons in terms of the national interests, the Qantas Sale Act also has not just majority Australian owned, it has very clear statements about the need for regional access and regional service provision. If you have a foreign-owned airline, they will have no interest necessarily in flying to a regional destination that mightn't be profitable in the first 12 months, but which has, in terms of building up support for the tourism sector or for just travel from that regional destination. There are a range of provisions in the Qantas Sale Act that are important. There's a reason why nation-states want an airline based in their country, and for an island continent that has no land borders, it is more important for Australia than any other country because we rely upon aviation or shipping as the only other way that we can move freight and people.
Restructure to have a Qantas International that was...
No, we support majority Australian owned, both in terms of the Qantas Sale Act provision. We have said with regard to some of the other provisions, the aviation white paper, there's a 35-25 rule. We said in the aviation white paper, recommended that be considered. At the time, there wasn't support for that in the Parliament. Those measures, but in terms of the Australian provisions, the whole reason why you want to defend an Australian airline is that it remain Australian.
Mr. Short, you put forward a very convincing case there for a national airline. Do you accept that that also is the case that Qantas and many other people argue is one of the reasons why Qantas can't compete, and therefore you're putting forward an argument for effectively having to subsidise this airline on a longer-term basis?
No, that's not right. Qantas has been very effective at competing indeed in terms of, if you look over a period of time, we have a very competitive domestic aviation sector here in Australia. It's an open sector. It is the most open sector in the world. You can't, for example, operate in a similar way in the United States or within Europe in the way that our domestic aviation sector operates. So it's an open and competitive sector, and Qantas have been able to continue in that. They have indeed, and that is a tragedy. But what you have also had is two, as Mr. Joyce said in his press conference, there are two events that have occurred recently. One is the capital raising of Virgin with the three other airlines contributing in November. The second is the downgrade in December. That is why, since then, December 6 is the key date. Since then, the government should have acted.
Calls for a judicial inquiry.
Virgin is unregulated. Shouldn't they be free to capital raise however they like? And doesn't that again highlight the disparity between the operating conditions of Qantas and its rival?
I'm not. Virgin, of course, are able to do that. But in terms of a government response, the fact is that governments around the world have responded in terms of aviation. The New Zealand government responded in a particular way with Air New Zealand. Governments around the world have responded. In the United States, they respond by having a much more protective regime in terms of their domestic structure. In Europe, they've responded in terms of the European system is quite protective in terms of European airlines as well. Governments need to have an appropriate response. This government knows that it has to respond. They've said they're going to respond. They've briefed you and everyone in this room day after day that they're going to respond, and nothing has happened up to this point.
Mr. Albany, Mr. Joyce said that they had approached the government 2 years ago to get some action, and that
that is why they had to take action now to cut 5,000 jobs.
He didn't
cut
say
their
that
costs.
at all. He did not say that. I heard his press conference. He said nothing like that. I'm afraid. What he said was that there are ongoing policy discussions with. I would have met as a minister, Alan Joyce and John Borghetti on a very regular basis, as well as Mr. High from Rex. Met him in Australia and in Singapore, where he's based. I met John Sharp regularly. I met all of the airlines. There are ongoing policy issues. This became an issue very clearly. The two events that have been identified have occurred since the change of government. Prior to the change of government, I provided a letter of comfort which was given to the press, not by me, at some stage towards the end of last year, but I provided the letter of comfort to them in August, and that at that point satisfied the markets. There wasn't a downgrade on our watch.
On the 35 and 25% rules, how far would Labor be prepared to go to allow a greater ownership on those restrictions? Would you go all the way up to 49%, for example, for a single airline?
Well, we're not the government. We're not the government, so we'll wait for a proposition from the government in terms of those issues. At the moment, the foreign ownership question, can I say this? At the moment, it's on 39, I think is the figure at the moment. This whole issue is a distraction from a government that is looking for other reasons to not act. Just like we have continually workers being blamed every time that there are job losses.
Claims this morning that
Mr. Joyce said today in his press conference that he thinks it could take months or possibly years to get the Qantas Sale Act amended. It doesn't sound like he's actually holding up much hope of that change happening. He wants some near-term action.
It's not a priority. It's not a priority.
Do you think, based on what you heard him say, that means, just to focus the debate here, the government has to act immediately to offer a debt guarantee to Qantas?
Yep. Must be your question spot on. The government want everyone to think that the Sale Act is the key issue. We've had them since early December. Joe Hockey acting like some sort of second-rate Shakespearean actor. What should I do? Woe is me. The truth of the matter is they've known, the Abbott government has known since the 6th of December, we've got to do something. They don't want to do anything to fight for these jobs. Qantas management have been very explicit. The debate about the Sales Act is not the issue they're dealing with now. The issue is now that Joe Hockey laid out a challenge to Qantas. You know, you've got some legislation. Remember, he had 4 criteria. There was some legislation. Does legislation exist? Yes, it does. Is Qantas getting its house in order? And that was effectively what it was doing. They were the conditions. These are very hard news for 5,000 people, but hard decisions have been made. New planes have been cancelled. Routes have been changed. We're seeing jobs lost in the back office. We're seeing line maintenance being changed. The government has run out of excuses. It is now time for Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey to make a decision. Do they want to save Qantas, or do they just want to play politics?
So what would you do?
Well, I believe that we should keep the majority Australian test. We've made that very clear, as Anthony's expounded at some length. We've made it very clear, I think, in our presentation this morning, that other than the requirement, there's requirements in the Sale Act in Section 7, and we think that it is important that a company has its head office in Australia. We think it's important that its board is in Australia. But I'm just sorry, I'm just answering. Yes, but I'm just going through what we say when we talk about what we think is important. We think it is important that the majority of maintenance work and the other work is done in Australia. But if the government was to propose providing a line of standby credit, a credit guarantee, then we would look with some interest at that government proposition. What we would say to Joe Hockey is, don't forget what happens when you don't act in aviation. You see thousands of jobs lost. There are still a lot more people working at Qantas. Labor hasn't given up on fighting for them. If the government is sufficiently negligent that all they want to do is have a debate about should the Chinese government be allowed to buy our airline, should someone in the Middle East be allowed to buy our airline. That is a betrayal of the remaining Qantas jobs, and it means that the hard decisions being made now are for nothing.
What conditions would you place on that guarantee?
How many more Qantas jobs will be lost if the Sales Act were removed and those restrictions were lifted?
I'm going to get Anthony to answer this in detail, but I'll just give you an initial observation. If they remove the Sales Act, first of all, we have got one of our large companies on the ASX who, if the main investment decisions are being made overseas, we will see an inevitable drift, as always is the case, from that economic activity in Australia overseas. But when we talk about the jobs, a foreign investor, if it's the government of China or one of the Chinese-owned airlines, buy or apply to have a majority stake, that'll have to go through the Foreign Investment Review Board. This is why the government is playing a con job on Australia and saying that's the key issue. If the government didn't have the ticker to allow the Americans to buy a share of GrainCorp, well, Qantas is GrainCorp on steroids, and they are going to panic at making a decision. So let's talk straight here. This is a matter of national aviation policy, tens of thousands of jobs. It is time for the Abbott government. They've teased everyone. They've teased the media. They've teased the markets. They've teased customers. They've teased, well, in fact, they've done worse to Qantas workers. They've left them in a state of insecurity. It's now time to be upfront. Are you going to help, or are you just going to engage in politics? Well, I don't want to find out the risk of losing more high-skilled, productive jobs. And let me just say to the families of all the pilots and flight attendants, the engineers, the people who work at the gates, the baggage handlers, the caterers, the cleaners, we think that what you do is important. We don't think it is your fault that the job losses have occurred. We do want to see management do a better job, but what we also say to you is that Labor will work with the Abbott government to give them the bipartisan support to keep and fight for your jobs and to keep Australia's #1 tourism infrastructure security icon in Australian hands.
You look with interest at the debt guarantee or an assistance package. What do you think the government should be doing in terms of putting conditions on the assistance? Should there be job conditions on assistance or other conditions put on it?
Well, look, we've said our job isn't to be the government. We, though, as a constructive opposition, I don't think we can have done any more than whether it's Bill, myself, Chris Bowen as the Shadow Treasury spokesperson, all of us have said we will be constructive. Act. We've talked with the government. Qantas have been walking through the doors time after time. I don't know if this was, you know, Tony Abbott, who's still acting like an opposition leader today, if this was him, he would have been out there opposing everything with more insecurity for Qantas workers as well as for the Qantas company. That would have been his response. We are different. We haven't acted that way. We've been constructive. We've put forward. The bottom line is the whole point of having an Australian airline is that it remains here. It's not the flying kangaroo if there's a flag of another country on the wing rather than the kangaroo.
Why isn't this good money after bad, and don't you accept at all that the parlous state of the airline is due to bad management, bad investments?
We're not talking about, and Qantas aren't talking about, a grant. What they're talking about is a facility for which they would pay a fee. So in terms of the impact on the budget, that is one of the reasons why it's quite inexplicable that you've had 3 months of speculation and thought bubbles. I think Warren Truss only discovered this week the Air Navigation Act and those provisions that were there. It's the first time he sort of mentioned it. I've been talking about that for months. You know, they haven't paid attention to this. They haven't paid attention to detail. They're too busy playing politics with everything rather than acting like a government.
But will this save the airline if the management's no good?
We were very good. I certainly am not uncritical of the Qantas management, and people will recall my response to the grounding of the airline. I regard that as a mistake then, and I regard that as a mistake now. It damaged Qantas's brand. But in terms of the repercussions if the government just sits back and continues to do worse than doing nothing is what they have done. They have speculated about doing something and then failed to follow through.
There have been calls this morning for a judicial review into Qantas with claims that the company has exaggerated some of the losses and that it's propping up Jetstar. What's your response to that? Also, do you acknowledge that if the government does provide a debt guarantee to Qantas, other companies will be lining up for exactly the same thing? And if the government came to you specifically and said, would you examine the 25% cap limit on individual foreign owners, would you be prepared to look at that?
I'll get Anthony to go to a couple of the detailed points on what you say, but there's an issue here which somehow says that providing some support to Qantas in the way of a debt guarantee would make Australia unusual in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the rest of the world has government intervention in their airlines. We would be the bunnies if we just waved goodbye to an Australian icon, and if we believe that there's a level playing field and somehow the rest of the world isn't investing in their airlines and governments aren't, that would be a terrible mistake. In terms of the debate about management, as Anthony said, a number of us were highly critical of Qantas's decision to ground the airline, and we went out on a limb, and indeed I think the Abbott government praised them for doing it, when I think history's shown that that was perhaps an excessive reaction. In terms of though debating the merits of management, it is not the role of governments to get in and manage and micromanage companies. What it is the role, though, is to recognise what is in the long-term national interest. We believe that Australia is smart enough and capable enough to have majority Australian ownership and to have a successful, vibrant industry, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. In terms of the 25%, if the government says that that's an issue that they need support on, we would be open to listen to it. I might ask Anthony to supplement.
Yeah, can I just say that that was in the recommendation of the Aviation White Paper, the only aviation white paper that's ever been commissioned by a government, was received by us, I think from memory, at the end of 2009. We made it clear at that time, but I make this point. If foreign ownership was the issue, the Qantas Sales Act, then foreign share ownership today wouldn't be 39, it'd be 49. It'd be pushing up against the barrier. It's not the issue, and today I think Mr Joyce made it clear what his priorities were, and in terms of, I would find it remarkable if a government minister, I don't talk about private conversations that we have, but I would find it remarkable if a government minister said that Qantas were walking through their door and saying the biggest issue we have, what we need action on today, is the Qantas Sales Act. That's not the case. That's not the case.
Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps 3 more questions, if you in fact have 3 more questions.
Buying a stake. What do you think about buying a stake in Qantas? It's going cheap, about 8% lower than yesterday.
No.
Well, I think that if the government were to start talking about the debt guarantee, that would be possibly the most productive avenue of discussion. I don't seriously expect the Abbott government to talk to us about that. But we just wish the Abbott government. Well, I'm not going to hypothecate about something which I don't think the Abbott government's fair income about Qantas. I think all they want to do is, here's the 3 tricks. They'll say it's carbon, when in fact Qantas has made clear it's not carbon. They'll blame the workers at some point. They just can't help themselves. They're like dogs returning. They're like pets returning to their dinner. They just can't help themselves. We could have a sporting bet. They will blame the pilots or the conditions. Rah rah rah. You know the script from Abbottland. And the third thing they might do is just blame us. And they'll say that, in fact, you almost guarantee that. So that's their recipe. They'll say, oh, well, we should just let anyone buy our airline. We know that if sovereign governments from other parts of the world fronted up to the Foreign Investment Review Board to buy Qantas, you know, the collective Abbott government would have a collective fit. You know, they'd panic. So let's understand what they will say, and let's say to the Abbott government, we know what you're going to say. So why don't instead we get on with the real issues?
Should Tony Abbott now explain what role Alistair Furnival, Senator Nash's former Chief of Staff, played in securing $16 million for Cadbury?
I think it was unbelievable to see pictures and images last night of Tony Abbott and Eric Abetz, the 2 senior leaders of the Abbott government, heroically standing up for this tourism infrastructure at Cadbury, And then one person across, there is the Minister Nash's disgraced Chief of Staff sitting there. You know, the government said, "Oh well, when we found out about these conflicts of interest, we got rid of him." Or no, actually, what they said is they've given conflicting views. I think it is incredible that you've got a senior food industry lobbyist sitting there at Cadbury, and yet we've seen the car industry gone. We see Alcoa go. We see Alcoa and Point Henry going. We see absolutely nothing emerging about Qantas. There are more questions for this government to answer about the role of the lobbyist, the government decision making on Cadbury. And when we talk about Minister Nash, you know, this is a ludicrous situation now. What we had is that Tony Abbott, Prime Minister of Australia, said that her Chief of Staff had to go because he'd been dilatory, he hadn't lived up to the spirit of the ministerial code of conduct and the conflicts of interest. Yet we have Minister Nash saying the only reason why he went is just to, you know, stop it being a media issue. Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Nash has given one reason why the Chief of Staff went. The Prime Minister of Australia has given another. They both can't be right, and the Prime Minister has to tell us who's telling the truth.
Can I just add something on the Cadbury issue? I was the Regional Development Minister in charge of the Tasmanian Jobs Plan. We had 3 groups that had been established by my predecessor, Simon Crean, one based upon the northwest, one in the northeast and one in the south. What they did were made up of industry people about future jobs growth and how jobs could be encouraged. You've seen the Abbott government re-announce some of those plans. It was a $100 million package. There were submissions received from right around Tasmania. There wasn't any lobbying or any submission received, and no approach to me as a minister at all from Cadbury. Not one. So you had this whole state government and federal government involved in this, not one proposal. A whole lot of proposals about a whole range of things with varying merits, but nothing.
Last question, sorry, last question.
Should that money now...
Sorry, it appears the Audit Commission's sort of unfavourably disposed towards the government's paid parental leave scheme. Do you think Mr Abbott should rethink it now in the context of the budget?
The revelation, the Abbott government's Commission of Cuts has given a thumbs down to Tony Abbott's gold-plated paid parental leave scheme is hugely embarrassing to the Abbott government. The Abbott government now, and the Prime Minister in particular, now needs to come clean. Is he going to go with the Commission's recommendations and break his promise, or will he stick to a scheme which everyone in the world except Tony Abbott knows is a dud? Thanks, everyone.
And that was the Leader of the Opposition, Bill Shorten, and the Shadow Transport Minister, Anthony Albanese, their press conference live from the Labor caucus room here in Parliament House. A press conference dominated, of course, by the news of Qantas cutting 5,000 jobs. At the core of that press conference, the allegation from the opposition that the government has been sitting on its hands when it comes to Qantas. They say that ever since December the 6th last year, that's the date where the credits rating agency Standard & Poor's downgraded Qantas's credit rating to junk status, that the government has known that this day has been coming and yet hasn't taken action so far. They also quote the Prime Minister as saying that any government assistance would be dependent on Qantas getting its own house in order. Well, they say Qantas is feeling the pain. It's cutting workers, 5,000 of them. It has a plan to cut $2 billion out of its cost base over the next 3 years. Therefore, the company is getting its house in order. Therefore, it can expect some sort of government assistance. But when it comes to what sort of government assistance, Labor is making it clear that it doesn't support any changes to the Qantas Sales Act, at least in respect of the limit on foreign ownership. Foreign ownership under the Act is capped at 49%, But Labor says that's a distraction, given that at this point in time, only 39% of the company is held by foreign ownership. And it also makes the point that if the government wasn't prepared to allow an American company to take over GrainCorp, then it's hardly likely to allow a foreign government or a foreign airline to take over Qantas. However, Labor is open to the second proposal that's been floated recently, and that is for the government to go guarantor for Qantas's debt. So that's where possibly we may see some developments. Now, that's all for Breaking Politics this morning. Thanks for joining us. But we'll be live streaming Question Time today at 2 p.m. from the House of Representatives. Qantas is sure to be a major topic there. I hope you can join us then.
home has a bathroom of unimaginable luxury to what we had just 50 years ago. Another indication, Deputy Speaker, of our increasing wealth and opportunity has been our ability to travel. Just over a century ago, it was generally only kings or queens or royalty that could afford international travel, or those being sent off to war. In fact, back in 1960, Deputy Speaker, when we had a population of 10 million people, only 77,700